Please tell me you own a suit that costs more than my rent." Harper slid the heavy ivory envelope across the mahogany bar. The man sitting next to her didn't blink. He just stared at the gold-embossed letters announcing her ex-boyfriend's wedding. He wasn't her friend. He was just a stranger nursing a neat bourbon. "I own several," he said, his voice low, scraping like sandpaper. "Good. Come with me to my ex's wedding." The stranger smiled. "Okay, grief is a quiet thing, but humiliation is loud. It rings in your ears like feedback from a blown speaker." Harper Blaine sat at the corner of the St. Regis Hotel bar, staring at the physical manifestation of her humiliation. It was a heavy piece of cardstock, edged in gold foil, demanding her presence at the union of Carter Hayes and Madison Tierney. 6 months. That was all it had taken for Carter to go from packing his bags in their cramped, fourth-floor walk-up to booking a string quartet for a country club estate in Newport. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her martini. The gin burned, clean and sharp, clearing the fog in her head just enough to let the anger back in. Carter had told her he needed to find himself. He needed space. What he actually needed, it turned out, was a woman whose father owned a private equity firm. Madison was everything Harper wasn't. Old money, soft-spoken, and genetically predisposed to wearing pastel cardigans without looking like a substitute teacher. The invitation was a power play. "Look at me now," it said. "Look at what you couldn't give me." She pushed the envelope away. It slid across the polished mahogany and bumped into the glass of the man sitting one stool over. Harper hadn't paid much attention to him when he sat down 20 minutes ago. She had registered the broad line of his shoulders and the dark wool of his overcoat. But that was it. Now, she looked at him. Really looked. He had the kind of face that didn't belong in a brightly lit room. The angles of his jaw were sharp, shadowed by a faint layer of stubble, and a thin, faded scar interrupted the line of his left eyebrow. He wasn't wearing a tie, and the top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, revealing a faint smudge of ink, a tattoo, crawling up his collarbone. He looked exhausted, but in a dangerous, coiled sort of way, like a guard dog forced to sleep with one eye open. He glanced down at the envelope, then slowly turned his head to look at her. His eyes were the color of wet asphalt, flat and utterly unreadable. "You're spilling into my airspace," he said. His voice didn't rise above the ambient hum of the bar, but it cut through the jazz playing overhead effortlessly. "Sorry," Harper muttered, reaching for the card. Before she could grab it, his hand came down. His fingers were long, the knuckles thick and calloused. He tapped the gold lettering. "Tierney, as in Arthur Tierney's daughter?" "You know them?" Harper asked, a bitter laugh escaping her throat. "Of course, everyone knows them. They own half the state." "I'm familiar with his portfolio," the man said smoothly. He pushed the envelope back toward her. "You don't look like the country club type." "I'm not. I'm the ex-girlfriend type." Harper finished her drink and signaled the bartender for another. She was crossing a line, slipping from tipsy into recklessly drunk, and she found that she didn't care. "He invited me to show off, to prove he won the breakup." The man watched her. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell her it was going to be okay, or that she was better off without him. He just stared, calculating. "Are you going? If I don't go, he wins by default. He gets to tell everyone I was too heartbroken to show my face." Harper gripped the edge of the bar, her knuckles turning white. "But if I walk in there alone, I look pathetic. I need to walk in there looking like the last 6 months have been a revelation. I need someone who makes Carter look like a boy playing dress-up." She turned her head and looked the stranger up and down, the expensive watch peeking out from his cuff. the relaxed, absolute stillness of his posture, the underlying hum of violence that seemed to radiate off him like heat from a radiator. The alcohol did the talking. "Please tell me you own a suit that costs more than my rent." He didn't blink. "I own several." "Good. Come with me to my ex's wedding." Silence stretched between them. The bartender set a fresh martini in front of Harper, but she didn't break eye contact with the stranger. She expected him to laugh. She expected him to call for his check and walk away from the crazy woman at the bar. Instead, a slow, terrifying smile touched the corners of his mouth. It didn't reach his eyes. "Okay," he said. Harper blinked, the bravado suddenly draining out of her. "Wait." "Really?" He reached into the breast pocket of his coat, pulled out a matte black business card, and slid it across the bar. There was no company logo on it, just a name and a phone number. Dante Gallo. "Text me the details," Dante said, standing up. He dropped $100 bill on the bar. He was taller than she had realized, towering over her sitting form. "Don't back out, Harper." She froze. "I didn't tell you my name." Dante didn't answer. He just adjusted his coat and walked out of the bar, leaving Harper staring at the black card as if it were a live grenade. The hangover was a physical assault. Harper woke up to the sound of a garbage truck grinding its gears on the street below her apartment. Sunlight sliced through the gap in her cheap blinds, stabbing her directly in the optic nerve. She groaned, rolling over and burying her face in a pillow that smelled faintly of dry shampoo and regret. It took 10 minutes for the memories to piece themselves together. The bar, the martini, the man with the scar. She sat up so fast her vision blurred. Stumbling into the kitchen, she found the ivory envelope sitting on the counter. Right next to it was the matte black business card. Dante Gallo. "Oh God," she whispered, rubbing her temples. She was a senior accountant at a mid-tier logistics firm. She audited spreadsheets for a living. She did not proposition terrifying strangers in high-end bars to be her fake boyfriend. She grabbed her phone and typed in the number. "Hey, it's the girl from the St. Regis. I was incredibly drunk last night. Please ignore everything I said. Have a good life." She hit send, threw the phone onto the couch, and went to take a shower. By the time she was dressed up for work, a sensible grey blazer, black slacks, armor for the mundane world, she had convinced herself the whole thing was over. A drunken mistake, neatly handled. She checked her phone before walking out the door. One new message. "I already cleared my weekend. I'll pick you up at your office at 5 Augahos, 14-20 Market Street, right?" Harper stared at the screen. She hadn't told him her last name. She definitely hadn't told him where she worked. The rest of the day was a masterclass in paranoia. Every time the elevator chimed, Harper jumped. She audited the same quarter-end report 3 times and still missed a glaring discrepancy in the overhead costs. By 4:55 p.m., she was packing her bag with frantic, jerky movements. She just needed to get to the subway. If she got to the subway, she could disappear into the crowd. She pushed through the revolving doors of her office building and hit the pavement, keeping her head down. "Harper." The voice was low, rough, and entirely too close. She stopped. Parked illegally in the loading zone directly in front of her building was a sleek, black Mercedes S-Class. The rear window was rolled down just enough to reveal Dante Gallo's face. In the harsh daylight, he looked even more intimidating. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit that fit him with bespoke precision. "Get in," he said. It wasn't a request. Harper looked around. The sidewalk was crowded with commuters, but no one was looking at them. People inherently knew to look away from cars like that, from men like him. "I texted you," she said, clutching her laptop bag to her chest like a shield. "I cancelled." I don't do cancellations, Dante replied quietly. He pushed the door open from the inside. Get in, Harper. You're holding up traffic. Survival instinct fought with her stubborn pride. Pride lost. She slid into the leather interior of the back seat, the door clicking shut with the heavy, airtight thud of an expensive vault. The driver in the front seat didn't turn around. He was built like a cinder block and stared straight ahead. How do you know where I work? Harper demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. How did you know my name? Dante poured 2 fingers of amber liquid from a crystal decanter hidden in the center console. He offered it to her. She shook her head. He took a sip. You paid your bar tab with a credit card, Dante said simply. A friend of mine manages the St. Regis. A 5-second phone call gave me your name. A 10-second internet search gave me your LinkedIn profile. That is wildly invasive. You asked a stranger to take you to a wedding. I like to know who I'm getting into a car with. Dante turned slightly to face her. The proximity was overwhelming. He smelled of bergamot, clean linen, and cold air. Arthur Tierney is hosting the wedding at his estate in Newport, correct? Yes, Harper said, narrowing her eyes. Why do you care so much about Arthur Tierney? Dante swirled the liquid in his glass. He didn't look at her like a man looking at a woman. He looked at her like a chess player examining a piece on the board. Arthur Tierney owns a shipping subsidiary that has been making my life very difficult, Dante said, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. He operates out of a private port. His union guys are causing problems for my union guys. He refuses to take my calls. He refuses to schedule a meeting. He hides behind lawyers and gated communities. Harper's stomach dropped. She wasn't naive. You didn't grow up in a city like this without understanding the subtle, unspoken dialects of power. Your union guys. Logistics, Dante corrected smoothly. I move things from point A to point B. Tierney is blocking my route. And the wedding is at his private estate. The one with the biometric security gates and the armed patrols. The one that will be flooded with caterers, florists, and drunk guests this weekend. Dante looked at her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. It's the only time his doors will be open. I need to be inside that house. You have a +1. Harper pressed herself against the leather door panel. You're using me as a Trojan horse. We're using each other, Dante said. You want to humiliate your ex-boyfriend. I want to have a brief, private conversation with his future father-in-law. Our goals align perfectly. And if I say no? Dante smiled, and again the coldness of it made her shiver. You won't say no. You want this, Harper. I saw your face at the bar. You're angry. You want Carter to feel small. I excel at making men feel small. He was right. God help her. He was right. The thought of walking into that estate with Dante on her arm, a man who radiated absolute, terrifying authority, sent a dark, vindictive thrill straight down her spine. Fine, Harper breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. But I have rules. Dante raised a brow. Rules? I am not getting caught in the middle of a Mafia shootout. Dante actually chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. I'm a businessman, Harper. We don't do shootouts anymore. It's bad for the stock price. Any other rules? You pretend to like me, she said, her voice tightening. Carter knows me. He knows when I'm faking it. If you stand there looking like a bodyguard who wants to strangle everyone in the room, he's going to know it's a setup. Dante's gaze dropped to her mouth, lingering for a fraction of a second before meeting her eyes again. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous, heavy, thick, and suddenly suffocating. Don't worry, Dante murmured. When I play a part, I play it well. He'll think I worship the ground you walk on. They didn't go to her apartment to pack. Dante informed her, quite bluntly, that whatever she had in her closet was not going to work. The car pulled up to a private boutique in the Gold Coast district, the kind of place that didn't have window displays or price tags. Dante bypassed the front counter, leading her directly to a private room in the back, all mirrored walls and plush velvet seating. A sleek woman in a minimalist black dress appeared with a glass of champagne. Dante waved her away. "We need a weekend wardrobe," Dante told the woman, not taking his eyes off Harper. Friday night rehearsal dinner, Saturday daytime casual, Saturday evening formal, Sunday morning departure. Dark colors, structured, nothing floral, nothing sweet. The woman nodded sharply and vanished. "I am perfectly capable of dressing myself," Harper snapped. "You dress like an accountant trying not to get fired," Dante replied, sinking into one of the velvet chairs. He steepled his fingers, watching her. "Carter expects you to show up looking heartbroken. If you wear pastels or ruffles, you look like you're trying too hard to be Madison. You can't beat her at her own game. You have to play a different game entirely." The attendant returned with a rack of clothing. For the next hour, Harper was subjected to a ruthless evaluation, a navy silk slip dress. Too fragile. A crimson ball gown. Too desperate. Finally, the attendant handed Harper a heavy, emerald green gown. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and an open back that plunged down to the base of her spine. It was constructed of a material that moved like liquid, but held its shape like armor. Harper put it on. She turned to the mirror. She didn't look like herself. The cynical, exhausted woman who spent her days staring at Excel sheets was gone. In her place was someone sharp, wealthy, and untouchable. The deep green made her skin look like porcelain, and the severe cut of the front contrasted violently with the dangerous expanse of skin in the back. She stepped out of the dressing room. Dante had been looking at his phone. He glanced up. He stopped moving. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Dante's gaze dragged slowly from the hem of the dress, up the tight column of her waist, to the high collar at her throat. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a compliment. He just looked at her, as if he were memorizing the coordinates of a target. "That one," he said quietly. His voice was rougher than it had been a moment ago. By Friday afternoon, they were on the road to Newport. The drive took 3 hours. The first hour was spent in silence, Harper staring out the window at the grey ribbon of the highway, while Dante reviewed documents on a tablet. The tension in the car was thick, a living thing breathing between them. "We need a story," Harper finally said, breaking the silence. Dante didn't look up from his screen. "We met at a gallery opening in Soho, an exhibition of brutalist architecture photography. You hated it. You were complaining loudly to a waiter. I overheard you, agreed with you, and bought you a drink." Harper blinked. "That's oddly specific." "The best lies are built on specific, boring truths," Dante said, setting the tablet down. "If Carter asks about my work, I'm a venture capitalist focusing on supply chain logistics. It's technically true." "And us?" Harper asked, turning slightly in her seat to face him. "How long have we been together?" 4 months. Long enough for the honeymoon phase to settle into something serious, short enough that we still can't keep our hands off each other. Harper's pulse fluttered, an annoying, panicked rhythm against her collarbone. "Hands off each other." Dante turned his head. His dark eyes locked onto hers, holding her gaze with the gravitational pull of a black hole. "You said Carter knows you. He knows your tells. If we act like polite roommates, he'll smell blood in the water." "I am going to touch you, Harper. I am going to hold your hand. I am going to put my hand on your waist, and I am going to look at you like I want to drag you into an empty room." He leaned closer, the scent of bergamot wrapping around her. "And you are going to look back at me like you'd let me. Understood?" Her throat felt suddenly tight. She swallowed hard, nodding once. Understood. They arrived at the Tierney estate just as the sun began to set, casting long, bleeding shadows across the manicured lawns. The main house was a sprawling, stone monstrosity that looked more like a fortress than a home. Men in black suits stood at the wrought iron gates, checking names off a digital manifest. Dante rolled the window down. The guard leaned in, his eyes darting to Dante's face, then to the tablet in his hand. The guard's demeanor shifted instantly. It was subtle, a slight stiffening of the spine, a deferential dip of the chin. "Mr. Gallo, welcome. Valet will take your car at the main portico." The gates swung open. Harper gripped her small clutch purse until her fingers ached. "Showtime, Harper," Dante murmured. They pulled up to the front steps. The rehearsal dinner was already in full swing on the terrace overlooking the ocean. String music drifted through the crisp evening air, mingling with the low hum of wealthy voices and the clinking of crystal. Dante got out, tossing the keys to a wide-eyed valet, and walked around to open Harper's door. He offered his hand. She took it. His palm was warm, hard, and entirely steady. The warmth bled through the chill in her fingers, a grounding weight in a world that suddenly felt like it was spinning too fast. He didn't just hold her hand. He pulled her close, tucking her against his side, his arm wrapping firmly around her waist. It wasn't a loose, casual hold. It was possessive. They walked up the stone steps. Heads turned. Conversations tapered off. Harper felt the weight of a dozen stares, but she kept her chin high, her shoulders back. "You command attention," Dante had said. They reached the top of the terrace stairs. And there he was. Carter stood near the bar, holding a scotch, laughing at something a groomsman had said. He was wearing a light blue linen suit. He looked perfectly at ease. He looked happy. Then he looked up and saw Harper. The smile fell off his face. His eyes widened, sweeping over her, taking in the emerald dress, the flawless hair, the cold, unbothered expression she had spent the last 3 hours practicing in the rearview mirror. Then, Carter's gaze shifted to the man standing beside her. Harper felt Dante shift his weight. It was a microscopic movement. The subtle rolling of his shoulders, the expansion of his chest. Dante didn't glare. He didn't try to look intimidating. He just looked at Carter with the calm, flat indifference of a predator observing a mouse. Carter swallowed hard, his grip tightening on his glass. The smug, victorious ex-boyfriend routine died in his throat before he could even speak a word. Dante leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of Harper's ear. His breath was warm, sending a jagged shiver straight down her spine. "Look at him," Dante whispered, his voice dark and laced with dark amusement. "He already regrets it." Carter stepped forward. He moved like a man walking on a sheet of thin ice, trying to mask his panic with a practiced country club smile. "Harper," Carter said. His voice was a fraction too loud, ringing awkwardly over the soft jazz playing from the terrace speakers. "You made it. I wasn't sure you would." "It's a beautiful venue, Carter," Harper replied. The heavy silk of her emerald dress brushed against her legs as she shifted her weight. "I couldn't miss it." Carter's eyes darted to Dante. He tried to size him up, looking for a flaw, a cheap watch, scuffed shoes, anything to tear the man down. He found nothing. Dante was an impenetrable wall of bespoke charcoal wool and terrifying calm. "And you brought a guest," Carter noted, extending a hand that was ever so slightly trembling. Carter Hayes. Dante didn't take the hand immediately. He let it hang in the salt-tinged air for 3 agonizing seconds, long enough for it to become an insult. Then he reached out, and gripped Carter's hand. "Dante Gallo." Dante didn't squeeze hard to prove a point. He didn't need to. The sheer, overwhelming indifference in his grip did the job. Carter pulled his hand back quickly, rubbing his thumb against his knuckles, as if he'd touched a live wire. "Dante," Carter repeated, testing the name. "What line of work are you in?" "Logistics," Dante said smoothly. He shifted his stance, moving a fraction of an inch closer to Harper. His hand slid from her waist, tracing a slow, deliberate line up her spine before settling on the bare skin between her shoulder blades. Harper's breath hitched. His fingers were hot against the chill of the evening air. It wasn't a grope. It was a brand. "Supply chain management," Dante continued, his voice dropping into a register that felt like a physical weight in the space between them. "I ensure highly valuable cargo reaches its destination without interference." Carter swallowed. "Right. Fascinating. How did you two?" He gestured vaguely between them, unable to hide the disbelief. Before Harper could recite the lie they had rehearsed in the car, a soft voice interrupted. "Carter, are you abandoning me already?" Madison Tierney appeared at Carter's elbow. She was breathtaking in a quiet, understated way. She wore a simple white cocktail dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose chignon. She looked exactly like a woman who had never worried about a bank overdraft fee in her entire life. She looked at Harper, and for a second, a flicker of genuine guilt crossed her features. "Harper, I'm so glad you came." "Congratulations, Madison," Harper said. It surprised her to find that she meant it. Looking at Madison, she didn't feel anger. She just felt tired. "And who is this?" Madison asked, her gaze drifting up to Dante. Her polite smile faltered slightly, instinctively registering the danger radiating off him, even if her sheltered mind couldn't categorize it. "This is Dante," Harper said. "We met at an exhibition in Soho," Dante smoothly provided, pulling Harper just a millimeter tighter against his side. Harper was mercilessly critiquing a photograph of a concrete wall. "I was captivated. I bought her a martini to keep her talking. I haven't been able to let her go since." He looked down at Harper as he said it. His dark eyes caught the ambient light of the terrace lanterns, turning them into chips of obsidian. He smiled. A small, private thing, meant only for her. It was a terrifyingly convincing performance. For a split second, Harper's own heart betrayed her, stuttering a rapid rhythm against her ribs. Carter looked like he had swallowed a lemon. "Well," Carter choked out, "we should mingle. Dinner is in 20 minutes. He grabbed Madison by the elbow and steered her away quickly, nearly clipping a waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes in his haste to retreat. Harper exhaled a long, shaky breath, the tension leaving her shoulders in a rush. "Good God." Dante let his hand drop from her back. The sudden absence of his touch left her skin feeling cold. "He's weak. He left you because he wanted an easier life, not because he found a better one." Harper looked up at him, startled by the blunt assessment. "You figured that out in 2 minutes?" "I read people for a living, Harper. Men like Carter are written in large print." Dante wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze was sweeping the terrace, systematic and cold. Following his line of sight, Harper spotted the target. Arthur Tierney was holding court near the edge of the stone balcony. He was a thick-set man in his 60s, with a silver beard and a booming laugh. He was surrounded by a phalanx of men in identical dark suits. They weren't guests. They were private security, standing with their hands clasped in front of them, their eyes scanning the crowd. "Your father-in-law looks heavily guarded for a rehearsal dinner," Harper noted quietly. "Arthur is a paranoid man," Dante replied, taking a glass of bourbon from a passing tray. "He stole a lot of money in his 30s to build his empire. You don't get to sleep soundly when you build a house on someone else's foundation. How are you going to talk to him with all those guards? I don't need to talk to him tonight, Dante said, taking a slow sip of the amber liquid. Tonight, I just need him to see me. Dante stepped forward, moving out of the shadows of the awning and directly into the path of the terrace lighting. He didn't approach Arthur. He didn't raise a glass. He simply stood there, perfectly still, staring across the 70 feet of crowded space. It took a minute, but the shift was palpable. One of the security guards noticed Dante first. The man nudged his partner. Then Arthur Tierney turned his head. Even from a distance, Harper saw the blood drain from Arthur's face. The older man's booming laugh cut off abruptly. The jovial father of the bride vanished, replaced by a man looking at a ghost holding a loaded gun. Dante didn't blink. He raised his bourbon glass an inch, a mock salute. Arthur turned his back instantly, his shoulders stiff, speaking frantically to his head of security. Dante turned back to Harper, a dark, satisfied calm settling over his features. "Dinner is served," he said quietly, offering his arm. "Let's eat." The guest suite was located in the east wing of the estate. It was larger than Harper's entire apartment, decorated in muted blues and creams, featuring a vaulted ceiling and a set of French doors that opened to a private balcony overlooking the Atlantic. In the center of the room sat a massive, four-poster, king-sized bed. Harper stared at it from the doorway. She had audited multi-million-dollar accounts without breaking a sweat, but the sight of that mattress sent a spike of pure, unfiltered panic straight to her throat. Dante walked past her, dropping his leather duffel bag on the floor near a large velvet armchair. He didn't look at the bed. "I'll take the chair," he said, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it over the back of the furniture. "Don't be ridiculous," Harper snapped, her nervous energy manifesting as irritation. She stepped into the room and closed the heavy oak door behind her. "You can't sleep in a chair. You're huge. You'll break your neck. It's a king bed. We're adults." Dante turned around. He paused, his hands resting on his hips, head tilted slightly as he observed her. The polite, attentive mask he had worn all evening was completely gone. In the quiet, dim lighting of the bedroom, he looked dangerous again, exhausted, but lethal. "Harper," he said, his voice flat. "I sleep about 3 hours a night. When I do sleep, I wake up violently if someone moves unexpectedly next to me. It's a reflex. You do not want to be in a bed with me when that happens." The blunt reality of the statement hit her like a bucket of ice water. He wasn't a venture capitalist. She had spent the last 5 hours pretending to be the girlfriend of a wealthy businessman. She had forgotten who she had actually hired. "Oh," she said, her voice small. Dante walked over to the minibar, pouring a generous measure of scotch into a tumbler. He didn't offer her one. He drank half of it in a single swallow, letting his head fall back slightly. He reached up and unbuttoned his cuffs, rolling the crisp white sleeves up to his elbows. His forearms were corded with muscle and thick veins, a patchwork of faded ink and pale, jagged scars. Harper set her clutch on the dresser, watching him in the mirror. "Are you going to kill him?" Dante stopped moving. He looked at her reflection in the mirror, his dark eyes unreadable. "Who?" "Arthur Tierney." Dante let out a short, harsh breath that might have been a laugh. He turned around, leaning against the edge of the mahogany desk. "No, Harper. I am not going to kill the father of the bride on his daughter's wedding weekend. I'm a savage, not a monster." "Then what are you going to do?" she asked, turning to face him. She was tired of the vague answers. The alcohol from the rehearsal dinner was wearing off, leaving behind a sharp, brittle clarity. "You said you needed 20 minutes with him. What happens in those 20 minutes?" Dante stared at her. He seemed to be weighing how much to tell her, evaluating whether she was brittle enough to break or strong enough to hold the truth. "Arthur owns a private port in Boston," Dante said quietly, his voice lacking any inflection. "It's a blind spot. Customs doesn't look too closely because Arthur pays them not to. 6 weeks ago, a container belonging to me was routed through his port. It was supposed to be a secure transfer. What was in it? Nothing you need to concern yourself with," Dante said sharply. But Arthur's men decided they wanted a cut of the transit fee. They held the container. When my men went to retrieve it, Arthur's people panicked. 2 of my men were put in the hospital. One of them is permanently paralyzed. Harper felt the air leave her lungs. The glamorous facade of the country club estate vanished, replaced by the ugly, brutal reality of blood and pavement. "I don't care about the cargo," Dante continued, stepping away from the desk. He paced toward the French doors, looking out into the pitch-black night. "I care about the precedent. If I let Arthur Tierney hold my shipments hostage and cripple my people without consequence, by next month, every low-level operator on the eastern seaboard will try to take a bite out of me. I cannot allow that." "So, what do you want from him?" "I want the port," Dante said. "I'm going to force him to sign the controlling interest of the shipping subsidiary over to me. He loses his toy, he loses his blind spot, and the message is sent. The tax for touching my people is everything you own." Harper stood frozen in the center of the room. She was an auditor. She dealt in numbers, legal contracts, and boardroom negotiations. She was standing in a room with a man who dealt in extortion and violence. She should be terrified, she knew that. But looking at Dante, watching the heavy, weary set of his shoulders, the absolute, unwavering loyalty he had for the men working under him, she didn't feel fear. She felt a strange, terrifying sense of awe. "Why bring me?" Harper asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You could have broken into this house. You have the resources." Dante walked back toward her. He stopped when he was less than 2 feet away. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off his body, smelling the sharp scent of scotch and expensive cologne. "Because a break-in causes panic. Panic causes mistakes. Mistakes cause collateral damage," Dante said, looking down at her. His eyes flickered down to her lips, then back up to her eyes. "Walking through the front door with a beautiful, angry woman on my arm, that just causes confusion. Confusion is a much more useful weapon." He reached out. For a second, Harper thought he was going to touch her face. She held her breath, her heart hammering wildly. Instead, he bypassed her face and reached to the back of her neck. His fingers brushed against her bare skin, sending a jolt of electricity down her spine as he found the hidden zipper of her gown. "Get some sleep, Harper," he murmured, his voice rough. He pulled the zipper down 3 inches, just enough for her to easily step out of the heavy dress. He stepped back immediately, retreating to the velvet chair. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. The wedding took place at 2 o'clock the following afternoon on the great lawn, directly overlooking the crashing waves of the Atlantic. The sun was blindingly bright. The air smelled of salt and 1,000 imported white roses that lined the aisle. Harper sat in the 4th row, wearing a tailored navy blue midi dress that Dante's stylist had selected. It was conservative, but cut so sharply it looked like it could draw blood. Dante sat beside her, a solid, immovable presence in a black suit and a black tie, while the rest of the guests whispered and smiled, taking photos with their phones. Dante sat in absolute stillness, his eyes tracking the perimeter of the lawn. The string quartet began to play. Carter took his place at the altar. Harper watched him. She remembered the day they moved in together. She remembered eating takeout on the floor because they couldn't afford a dining table. She remembered thinking he was the center of her gravity. Now, looking at him in his custom tuxedo, shifting nervously on his feet, he looked small. The illusion was entirely broken. He wasn't a man who had outgrown her. He was a man who had taken the path of least resistance. Madison walked down the aisle. She looked radiant. Carter smiled at her, but as she reached him, his eyes flicked quickly to the fourth row. He looked at Harper, and then he looked at Dante. Harper didn't look away. She didn't smile. She just held Carter's gaze until he blinked and turned back to his bride. "It's over," Dante whispered, leaning in close so only she could hear. "The ceremony just started," she whispered back. "Not the ceremony, you." Dante didn't look at her. His eyes remained on the altar. "You don't care anymore. The anger is gone." Harper swallowed the lump in her throat. He was right. The vindictive fire that had driven her to a hotel bar and into the car of a Mafia boss had burned itself out. There was nothing left but cold ash. "I don't," she admitted softly. "Good," Dante said. He checked his watch. The matte black dial caught the sunlight. "The reception is in the grand ballroom. The moment they cut the cake, Arthur's security will be focused on the crowd. That's my window. I'll need 20 minutes. Stay at the table. Do not look for me." Okay. The reception was an overwhelming display of wealth. Champagne towers, an ice sculpture of a swan, and a 12-piece band playing Sinatra covers. Harper sat at a table near the back, picking at a plate of sea bass she couldn't taste. True to his word, the moment the band announced the cake cutting, Dante stood. He didn't make an excuse. He just touched Harper's shoulder once, a brief, heavy pressure, and melted into the crowd moving toward the dance floor. Harper watched him disappear, her stomach twisting into a tight knot. "It's handled," she told herself. "He knows what he's doing." "Where did your bodyguard go?" Harper jumped. She turned around to find Carter standing behind her chair. He was holding a glass of champagne, his face flushed with alcohol and defensive anger. "He's not a bodyguard, Carter. He's my boyfriend. And he went to the restroom." Harper kept her level, refusing to stand up and give him the satisfaction of a physical confrontation. "Shouldn't you be feeding your wife a piece of cake?" Carter sneered, pulling out the empty chair next to her and sitting down. "Drop the act, Harper. I know you. You don't date men like that." "Men like what?" "Men who look like they'd break someone's jaw for breathing wrong," Carter hissed, leaning in close. The smell of expensive liquor on his breath was overpowering. "I asked around. Arthur's security is terrified of him. They wouldn't even say his name. What the hell have you gotten yourself into?" "I've gotten myself into a relationship with a man who knows what a spine is," Harper replied coldly. "You don't know me, Carter. You knew a version of me that bent over backwards to accommodate your mediocrity. That woman doesn't exist anymore." Carter recoiled as if she had slapped him. His face darkened. "You brought him here to ruin this for me, to make me look like a fool." "No," Harper said, realizing the absolute truth of it. "I brought him here to remind myself what I'm worth. You just happen to be the collateral damage." Carter opened his mouth to retort, his hand gripping the edge of the table tightly. "I suggest you remove your hand from my chair." The voice was terrifyingly quiet. It sliced through the loud music and the chatter of the ballroom with surgical precision. Carter froze. He slowly turned his head. Dante stood directly behind Carter. His suit jacket was perfectly buttoned. Not a hair was out of place. He didn't look like a man who had just extorted a billionaire. He looked like a god of death wearing a Rolex. Carter stood up so fast, his chair scraped violently against the marble floor. He didn't say a word. He looked at Dante, pale and trembling, before turning and fleeing back into the safety of the crowd. Dante watched him go, a look of profound disgust crossing his face. He pulled out the chair and sat down next to Harper. Harper stared at his hands. There was no blood. There were no bruised knuckles. But there was a definitive, terrifying finality in his posture. "Is it done?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dante reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment, thick with legal text, and a fresh, hurried signature at the bottom in blue ink. He didn't unfold it. He just tapped it against the table once before sliding it back into his pocket. "Arthur Tierney has decided to retire from the logistics business to focus on his growing family," Dante said calmly. He reached for his glass of water. "We're leaving in 10 minutes. Drink your champagne." Harper stared at him. "Just like that?" Dante turned to look at her. The cold, business-like detachment in his eyes softened just a fraction. It was the crack in the armor she had seen in the hotel room. He reached across the table, his large hand covering hers. "Just like that," Dante murmured, his thumb brushing against her knuckles. "I told you. I move things from point A to point B, and right now I'm moving us out of here." They didn't say goodbye to the bride and groom. Dante stood, buttoning his jacket with a singular fluid motion. He placed a hand at the small of Harper's back, a heavy, warm pressure that guided her through the maze of silk-covered tables and dancing guests. No one stopped them. The few members of Arthur Tierney's security detail who were stationed near the exits stepped aside, their eyes fixed firmly on the floor. The air outside the ballroom was jarringly cold. The sun had dipped below the horizon, replacing the golden afternoon with a bruised, violet twilight. The black Mercedes S-Class was already idling at the bottom of the stone steps. Cole, the cinder block of a driver, stood by the rear door. He didn't look like a valet. He looked like a soldier waiting for extraction. Harper slid into the back seat. The heavy leather smelled of bergamot and ozone. Dante climbed in beside her, and the door shut with an airtight thud, instantly cutting off the sound of the ocean and the distant wedding band. "JFK," Dante said to Cole, "the private terminal." Cole put the car in gear, and the estate began to roll away in the tinted windows. For the first 20 minutes, the silence in the car was absolute. The adrenaline that had been keeping Harper's spine rigid suddenly abandoned her, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. She sank back into the leather, kicking off her heels. She didn't care if it was ungraceful. Her feet hurt. Her brain hurt. She turned her head to look at Dante. He had taken off his tie, tossing it onto the opposite seat, and unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of his shirt. He was leaning his head back against the headrest, his eyes closed. In the dim, passing glow of the highway streetlights, the harsh lines of his face were deeply pronounced. He didn't look like a victor. He looked like a man who had been awake for 3 days and was calculating how many more hours he had to survive before he could collapse. "You're going to the airport?" Harper asked, her voice raspy. Dante didn't open his eyes. "I have a flight to Chicago in 2 hours. There is a secondary issue with the transit line. It needs to be handled in person." "More extortion?" He opened his eyes then, turning his head slowly to look at her. The exhaustion in his gaze was palpable, a physical weight. "More logistics. The extortion is reserved for special occasions." Harper pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around her legs. The emerald dress felt heavy now, like a costume she had worn for a play that had finally ended. "Carter was terrified of you. He didn't even try to fight back. Men like Carter rely on social contracts to protect them," Dante said quietly, reaching out to pour a measure of water from the center console. He handed her the crystal glass. "They think money and a zip code form an invisible shield. When you introduce them to someone who operates completely outside of those rules, their reality fractures. They don't know how to cope. So, they run." Harper took the glass. Her fingers brushed against his. They were rough, scarred, and completely steady. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked. "About why you brought me." Dante leaned back, looking out the window at the dark ribbon of the interstate. "I told you I needed a distraction." "You said confusion is a weapon," Harper's corrected, her grip tightening on the glass. "But you also said you brought me to remind me what I'm worth." "Which was it?" Dante was silent for a long time. The tires hummed against the asphalt. The rain started, a sudden, violent downpour that lashed against the reinforced glass of the Mercedes. "Both," he finally said. His voice dropped, losing the hard, businesslike edge it usually carried. "I needed to get into that house, but I also sat next to you in a bar and watched a smart, beautiful woman let a piece of paper convince her she was nothing. I don't like watching people settle for less than they are owed. It offends my sensibilities." He didn't look at her when he said it. He didn't try to make it romantic. It was a blunt statement of fact, delivered with the cold pragmatism of an auditor pointing out a discrepancy on a balance sheet. Harper stared at the hard line of his jaw. The exhaustion finally won. She set the glass down, shifted in her seat, and let her head fall against his shoulder. She expected him to stiffen. She expected him to pull away. Instead, Dante let out a long, slow breath. He adjusted his posture, shifting his weight so she had a better angle. Then he raised his arm and rested his hand heavily on her opposite shoulder, tucking her against his side. The heat of his body was absolute. "Sleep, Harper," he murmured into the dark interior of the car. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 6 months, she didn't dream of Carter. She didn't dream at all. The transition back to reality was brutal. Dante didn't drop her off. Cole did. When Harper woke up, the car was idling outside her apartment building in Brooklyn. The rain was still falling. Dante was gone. "Mr. Gallo caught his flight," Cole informed her, staring straight ahead through the windshield. He hit a button, unlocking the doors. "He left this for you." Cole handed a heavy paper bag over the console. It was from a 24-hour deli down the street. Inside was a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich, a black coffee, and the matte black business card she had left on the dresser at the estate. Harper stood on the wet pavement, holding a deli bag in a designer gown, and watched the taillights of the Mercedes disappear into the New York traffic. It felt like walking out of a movie theater in the middle of the day. The light was too harsh, the air too loud, the reality too mundane. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a car crash. Harper sat at her desk in the mid-tier logistics firm. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a static hum that gave her a headache behind her left eye. She was wearing her sensible grey blazer. She was staring at a Q3 projection spreadsheet. "Harper, I need the variance report by 3, Greg, her supervisor said, stopping by her cubicle. Greg wore khakis that were too short and possessed the management style of a passive-aggressive badger. "And we need to talk about your tone in the last client email. It was a bit direct." A week ago, Harper would have apologized. She would have typed out a careful, placating response and stayed until 6 to finish the variance report. She looked at Greg. She remembered standing on a terrace, watching a billionaire turn white with fear because of the man holding her hand. She remembered the absolute, uncompromising stillness of Dante Gallo. The client is operating on a net 30 payment structure, and they are 60 days delinquent, Harper said, her voice flat and even. She didn't look away from her monitor. "Being direct is the only reason they finally wired the money this morning. The variance report will be on your desk at 5. I have a backlog." Greg blinked. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away. Harper looked down at her keyboard. Her hands were shaking. just a little. The week dragged on. Every day was a masterclass in grey existence. The subway commutes, the cheap coffee, the endless columns of numbers. She tried to find satisfaction in her newfound backbone at work, but it felt hollow. She realized, with a sickening drop in her stomach, that the wedding hadn't given her closure. It had given her a baseline. She had spent the weekend vibrating on a frequency she didn't know existed, and now the silence of her apartment was deafening. She kept the matte black business card on her kitchen counter. Every night she stared at it. "He used you for access," the cynical part of her brain whispered. "It was a transaction. You paid for a fake boyfriend. He got a shipping port. The contract is fulfilled." But she remembered the heat of his hand on the back of her neck. She remembered the way he had let her sleep on his shoulder, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the crisp cotton of his shirt. That wasn't a transaction. That was a choice. By Friday evening, the silence was suffocating her. She poured a glass of cheap Pinot Grigio and sat on her couch. She picked up her phone. She opened a new message, typed in the number from the card, and stared at the blinking cursor. "Did you fix your transit line?" Delete. "Too casual. Thank you for the weekend." Delete. "Too formal." She tossed the phone onto the cushion. This was ridiculous. She was a senior accountant. She dealt in facts. The fact was, Dante Gallo lived in a world of violence, extortion, and high-stakes survival. She lived in a fourth-floor walk-up and argued with landlords about radiator heat. They were intersecting lines on a graph that had passed their single point of contact. A heavy, deliberate knock echoed through her apartment. Harper froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Nobody knocked on her door. Delivery drivers buzzed from the lobby. Friends texted. She set her wine glass down, crept to the door, and looked through the peephole. She ripped the door open. Dante stood in the hallway. The bespoke charcoal suit was gone. He was wearing dark jeans, heavy leather boots, and a black crew-neck sweater that clung to the broad span of his chest. The faint scar through his eyebrow was stark against his pale, exhausted skin. He looked rough. He looked real. "Your lobby security is non-existent," Dante said. His voice was a low, gravelly scrape in the quiet hallway. "The lock on the front door can be picked with a paperclip." "I don't like it." Harper stared at him. Her lungs forgot how to process oxygen. "What are you doing here?" Dante didn't answer immediately. He looked at her. He took in her oversized college sweatshirt, her bare legs, the messy bun on top of her head. He looked at her with the same intense, calculating focus he had used to dismantle Carter Hayes. "I finished in Chicago," he said. He stepped forward, forcing Harper to step back into the apartment. He closed the door behind him, the latch clicking shut with finality. "I got off the plane at JFK an hour ago. Cole asked for the address to the townhouse." "And?" Harper breathed, unable to move as he walked slowly toward her. "And I gave him this address instead," Dante said. He stopped inches away from her. The smell of cold air, jet fuel, and bergamot wrapped around her. "I spent the last 5 days negotiating with men who would stab me in the neck for a 10% margin. And the entire time, the only thing I could think about was the fact that you sleep in a bed and I sleep in a chair." Harper's breath hitched. "Dante, you ruined my focus, Harper." His voice dropped, vibrating in the narrow space between them. He reached out, his large, calloused hand cupping the side of her face. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone. "I don't make mistakes. But leaving you in that car on Sunday morning was a mistake." The touch of his hand was electric. It sent a shock wave of heat straight through her chest, vaporizing the cold, grey numbness of the past 5 days. Harper didn't pull away. She leaned into his palm. "We made a deal. The wedding is over. You got your port." Keep the port, Dante said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. I don't want it. I want the accountant who stared down an armed security detail and didn't blink. I want the woman who told her ex-boyfriend he was collateral damage. I want you. I don't belong in your world, Harper whispered. Her hands found the heavy wool of his sweater, gripping the material as if he were a life raft. I audit spreadsheets. I pay taxes. I live a boring, predictable life. Your life isn't boring. It's safe. Dante's other hand settled on her waist, pulling her flush against his solid frame. The heat radiating off him was overwhelming. And my world isn't a place you belong in. It's a place I survive. I don't want to bring you into the dark, Harper. I want you to be the reason I come out of it. It wasn't a line. It wasn't flowery poetry. It was a raw, desperate confession from a man who spent his life building walls, suddenly realizing he was suffocating behind them. Harper looked up at him. She saw the exhaustion, the violence, the ruthless pragmatism. But beneath it all, she saw the anchor. She saw the man who had let her sleep on his shoulder while he guarded the door. She didn't need a safe, predictable life. She had tried that with Carter, and it had hollowed her out. She needed someone who saw her sharp edges and didn't ask her to file them down. You sleep 3 hours a night, Harper said, her voice shaking, but her gaze steady. Dante's lips quirked into a faint, self-deprecating smile. I do. And you wake up violently. Yes. Harper slid her hands up the heavy wool of his sweater, wrapping her arms around the thick cord of his neck. She pulled herself up onto her toes, bringing her face inches from his. Then I guess I'll have to learn how to sleep with one eye open, she murmured. Dante didn't smile this time. A primal, desperate hunger fractured the last remnants of his control. He didn't ask for permission. He moved with the sudden, violent speed of a man starving. His mouth crashed down on hers. There was nothing polite about it. It was a collision of teeth, heat, and raw, unfiltered need. His hands gripped her hips, lifting her entirely off the floor. Harper gasped into his mouth, her legs instinctively wrapping around his waist as he backed her up, slamming her against the wall with enough force to rattle the cheap plaster. She kissed him back with equal ferocity. Her hands tangled in the thick, dark hair at the nape of his neck. The taste of him, scotch, coffee, and sheer, intoxicating danger flooded her senses. All the anger, the humiliation of the past 6 months, the grey monotony of her daily life, burned away in the friction of his mouth against hers. Dante broke the kiss, burying his face in the curve of her neck. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving against hers. His lips dragged across her collarbone, leaving a trail of hot, bruising kisses that made her spine arch. "Harper," he groaned, his voice a ragged scrape of sound. It was the first time she had heard him sound anything less than absolutely in control. He sounded undone. "The bedroom," she managed to gasp, her fingers gripping his shoulders tight enough to leave bruises. "Down the hall." Dante didn't need to be told twice. He carried her down the narrow hallway, kicking the bedroom door shut behind them, effectively locking the rest of the world out. The next morning, the sun bled through the cheap blinds of Harper's apartment, casting thin, golden lines across the tangled sheets. Harper woke up slowly. The air in the room was warm, heavy with the scent of sex and bergamot. She didn't move immediately. She lay perfectly still, registering the heavy, immovable weight pinning her left side to the mattress. Dante was asleep. His arm was thrown over her waist, holding her flush against his chest. His face was buried in the pillows, the harsh lines of his jaw softened by the rare, deep unconsciousness. He hadn't woken up violently. He hadn't woken up at all. Harper turned her head carefully, looking at the faded scar on his eyebrow, the dark ink sprawling across his bare collarbone. She reached out, tracing the line of a pale scar on his forearm, with a feather-light touch. Carter's wedding felt like a lifetime ago. The girl who had sat at the St. Regis bar, crying over an embossed piece of cardstock, was a stranger to her now. She had asked a monster to walk her into the fire just to prove she wouldn't burn. She hadn't burned. She had simply learned how to command the flames. Dante stirred. His grip on her waist tightened instinctively. He didn't open his eyes, but he buried his face in her hair, pressing a slow, heavy kiss to the crown of her head. "You're staring," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "I'm calculating," Harper corrected softly, resting her hand over his heart. The steady, powerful rhythm beat against her palm. Dante finally opened his eyes. They were dark, entirely focused, and completely hers. "Calculating what?" Harper smiled. It was a sharp, genuine thing. "The logistics of keeping you. If Harper and Dante's journey from a spiteful wedding +1 to an unstoppable force captivated you, you won't want to miss what happens next. The line between a calculated transaction and a consuming passion is razor thin. And sometimes, the most dangerous man in the room is the only one who can make you feel safe." Did you love the slow burn and the brutal honesty? Hit the like button, share this story with fellow romance readers, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply human, grounded stories of dark romance and redemption. Drop a comment below. Would you have handed Dante the black card?